And we're live.
Good evening, everybody. Tonight we are raging with two-time Eisner winner Mike Barron. We're going to be talking about Thin Blue Line, which is on IndieGoGo. And if you're tuning in right now, make sure that you head over to check it out. All of the links are in the show notes. And so is his social media. So make sure you follow him everywhere. Just don't peek at his windows because that's weird. We'll be right back after this intro. Raging. You should take it. And we thank you for tuning in. This is Raging with Mike Barron. We're talking about his creative journey, Thin Blue Line. This is episode 65. I'm going to drop the card here and say hello.
Hello.
Hi, Mike. How are you?
Good.
It has been a hot minute since we've had you in the hot seat. Last time I got to talk with you was Florida Man. I see you wearing the hat right there. This was last year. And we've got Thin Blue Line. But before we start talking about that, I have to say, the past 2 years for me personally, I have spent learning comic books, the industry, the business, the script writing. One of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. You've been doing this for a while. What in the hell were you thinking?
Me?
Yeah, you.
About comics?
About comics, getting into the business
I
of
always
comics.
felt that I could write comics. I never doubted that I could, and I could. But 30 years ago, I set out to write a novel, and it took me 30 years to learn how to write a novel because I'm a slow learner. But when I get it, I get it. But they're different disciplines. They have a lot in common, but they're different too, way different. A novel, you're on your own. You don't have an illustrator to carry the story. Conversely, there are a lot of writers working in comics who don't trust their illustrators, so they load the comic up with a lot of verbiage it doesn't need. Because one of the primary rules of storytelling is to show, don't tell. And that applies to prose as well as to comics.
One of the hardest things that I've done as a prose writer was getting into comics and writing scripts because it's very different. I mean, there are a lot of similarities when it comes to writing for maybe a play or for a movie script and things like that. But a lot of things taken into consideration because you're dealing with a page turn. You're dealing with an image that's there. So when you are going from prose to script writing, I mean, what is your writing process as far as that's concerned? Do you start with prose?
When I started writing comics, I would simply start by drawing each page out by hand with crude little stick figures to indicate what I wanted. My art it's not professional by any means, but it's good enough to get across any idea I want. I have a crude mastery of perspective. I can draw people, I can draw a car so that they're recognizable. And I think this is a great method to learn how to do comics because it teaches you how much weight a page can carry, both in terms of illustrations and in words. Because we've all seen comics like that. The famous one is a picture of Sir Isaac Newton with an apple bouncing off his head. And the caption says, "An apple bounces off Sir Isaac Newton's head." And Sir Isaac Newton says, "An apple has bounced off my head." Well, you don't need those because you can see the apple bouncing off his head. By now, we all know about Isaac Newton. But that's one of the problems with comics, that writers are tempted to describe what the illustrator has already showed.
Yeah, and the other thing that people have often struggled with was, especially me, like, what was the direction that you had when it came to writing a script? Because I've asked almost everybody who's been in this hot seat, what does a standard script look like? And they laugh. They're like, it doesn't exist.
It's true. There are so many ways to do it. I would write each comic by drawing each page out by hand, and then copying it and sending it to the illustrator and the editors, and they all loved it because they could see at a glance what I had in mind. They didn't have to wade through impenetrable prose because some people have difficulty describing things. I don't have that difficulty anymore, and I write full script, but my scripts are terse. They don't contain unnecessary words. And I'm always looking to pare them down, especially insofar as the words that actually appear on the paper. I want to tell the story as visually as possible.
Mm-hmm. So with your stick figures and everything, you're able to bring that over to an artist, and they can kind of decipher that with your script.
Absolutely. That's how I wrote Nexus, Badger, Punisher, Flash, Star Wars, dozens of other comics, and they all loved it. They didn't love my art, but they loved the script because it was so clear. It was transparent what I wanted. It was crystal clear how the story unfolded from panel to panel. And one of the values of learning to write comics like that is it forces you to think about the next panel. In other words, it forces you to think about what happens next. And that's the essential question in all literature: what happens next? And the reader has to care before he's going to turn the page. So you think about that and you say, well, this has to continue the story in an interesting manner, or they're not going to stick around.
That kind of suggests that you are a very visual thinker. I mean, when it comes to, like, do you imagine what it looks like first in your brain? Do you kind of dream in Technicolor and then you translate it down?
Yeah,
Or
anyway, yeah.
yeah, okay, because that's one of the things that seems, like the creative brain usually, especially the visual one, where you can almost see it on the big screen, and then it's just a matter of translating it down into paper so that somebody else on your team can take the ball and run with it.
Yeah, and often the artist would use my layouts. He'd fix them up.
Hmm.
He'd fix the perspective, sometimes the depth of field, or whatever. But he had no trouble understanding the way
Hmm.
I wanted the story to go or the visual cues.
It's kind of strange to me because, as a writer, um, and sure, you probably have that creative mind and you're thinking of it, but how descriptive are you? I mean, beyond your uh, you know little doodles and things like that you send out to the artist, because there are some people who say, oh, I want to see it panned down, I want to see it this, that, and they kind of really micromanage each panel. What would you say your style is then?
Well, I don't call it micromanaging, but I give clear directions as you would in a film script, such as exterior day, a southern mansion dripping with moss with columns out front, perhaps an old Ford pickup in the turnaround out front. I like portico shares a lot. The
Mhm.
truck is under the portico share, and I'll often throw in an actor to say, this is John, and then in parentheses, George Clooney. It's not because I want the actor, the drawing to look like George Clooney, but to give the artist a clue as to how I imagine that person. I always say, this is just a guideline. You can draw him or her however you want, but these are the people that could fill the role. And I often include pictures with the script. If I need a picture of CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, I go online and I Google pictures of CIA headquarters, and you get millions of them. And I'll send that to the artist.
um, Take me back to a young Mike Barron when you were looking at writing. There you just thinking. when uh, when you were thinking about making writing a career, comic books a career, what were some of the hurdles that you had to overcome?
My first job out of college was smoking marijuana for the government. I I graduated from the University of Wisconsin. I wanted to write, and I heard there were newspapers in Boston that would hire you if you could string two words together. So I moved to Boston, and I saw an ad in the back of the Boston Phoenix asking for volunteers to live in a hospital ward in Mattapan for a month, smoke government dope, and take tests all day.
Holy
It
shit,
was,
yes.
it was just like college. So I did that. And when I got out, I wrote that up and I sold it to the Boston Phoenix. And that's how I broke into journalism. For 7 years, I worked as a journalist. I wrote for a lot of newspapers, including the Boston Globe, a lot of rock and roll magazines like Cream and Fusion, because I was and still am a music nut, but I always just wanted to do fiction. And I met a number of great illustrators in Boston, such as Jim Taylor, not the singer, uh, and Larry Gonick, who did the history of the universe. And in fact, my first published comic was with Larry Gonick. It was an underground comic. And I always wanted to do comics, and I tried to teach myself to draw. I drew religiously, I drew night and day, but I had no formal training. And I wasn't very good at it, but it did get me to that level where I could illustrate what I wanted. And I moved back to Madison, Wisconsin in 1977. And in 1981, I got a call from a newspaper editor who said, "There's some guy down here trying to sell us his art, and he draws just like you." So I arranged to meet Steve Rude, and he opened his portfolio, and I gave up drawing. And we were in the right place at the right time in that Capital City Distribution, the second largest distributor of comics in the world, wanted to publish their own comics line. So I knew I could tell from Dude's drawings he wanted to do superheroes, and so did I. So I conceived this character, Nexus, who's a reluctant executioner of mass murderers. And there's a whole lot more to it because there's 40 years of Nexus now, and there's a lot of world building. And I went home and I drew the first 12 pages out by hand. And I gave them to Steve, and he penciled and inked and lettered them. And I showed them to the boys, and they said, "Yeah, let's go." And in fact, those first 12 pages are still in print in some of the many anthologies and omnibuses that Dark Horse has kept in print. And that's how I broke into comics. And on the strength of that, and the Badger, which I also created, the majors started calling me up and asking if I would write their titles for them, particularly Marvel with the Punisher, and DC with Flash and several other titles. And I continued to write by drawing each page out by hand like that.
That is pretty amazing because there are a lot of people who are like, I just kind of fell into it on accident and stuff. But you literally went out looking for it and found
Yes.
it.
Well, we were lucky. We were in the right place at the right time, but I was ready because I always had this unshakable faith that I could write. I don't know why. I mean, I started writing in high school for the high school newspaper. And then when I got out, I was in my senior year at college, I thought I'd bang out a quick paperback.
Hmm.
And as I said, it took me 30 years to learn how to write a novel. But that's because I'm a slow learner. I mean, there are people like Carson McCullers, who wrote The Heart is a Lonely Hunter when she was 24 years old. But those people are rare. And yet they're
Yes.
not so rare that I can name a dozen of them. But one day I got it. I was writing this novel, and I suddenly realized I've got it. I understand the structure. I understand what constitutes story. And since then, I've just been a writing fool, although I haven't written shit this past summer except for comic books, and I'm working on 3 novels, and I have to get back to them. I started working on them again this past week.
Okay, 3 novels. I can barely get past one.
Well,
How in the world are you keeping it straight?
I'm writing one with an old friend of mine who's a Green Beret and served 2 tours of duty in Afghanistan, and we're writing a military science fiction novel, and Diggs is doing the heavy lifting on that. He's just racing ahead chapter after chapter, and I'm editing his prose, which is like nerve gas. But his ideas are brilliant, and that's what's going to carry the book. I'm working on a second Nexus novel. The first one did very well, And in fact, Wordfire Press is publishing it this month. Do you know Kevin J. Anderson?
No, I do not.
He's the guy that writes the Dune novels, and he's a good
that
friend of
one.
mine. And Wordfire Press is his imprint, and he lives in Colorado as well. And we're pretty good friends. So I have a number of books under Wordfire, and the third one is the ninth biker novel, which is Hard-Boiled Crime, for my publisher Wolfpack, which also publishes my Florida Man novels.
Very, very busy. Okay, so how do you keep the stories straight? I mean, do you have a system? Do you have a notebook? Do you have sticky pads all over the place?
I always have a notebook, and I would advise any writer to carry a notebook with him or her at all times, and to write down anything of interest, anything that strikes their fancy. If I hear a name that appeals to me, I'll write that down and use it. If I hear a phrase that sounds fresh, I'll write that down. Because as you know, if you can put dialogue in a book, you don't want to just wade through a sea of cliches. You want it to sound fresh and appealing, because that's part of what makes a story interesting. That's part of how you hook the reader in. You use every trick in the book. You create a fascinating character like Sherlock Holmes, a fascinating situation like Jurassic Park, or you have a seductive narrative voice like Michael Chabon or James Ellroy. And those are just a few of the things that you can use, but you use everything that you can, including the kitchen sink, to hold the reader's attention.
So what's been the strangest point of inspiration for any one of your stories? Like what was the oddest thing where you're like, yeah, I can write that?
Well, I'll get a title stuck in my head and carry it around for years before I find a story that goes with it. And one of them was The Trail of the Loathsome Swine.
Oh.
And this is because my parents told me about their movie they liked with Fred MacMurray called The Trail of the Lonesome Pine. And in my head, I said, The Trail of the Loathsome Swine. And years later, I turned it into a story about a 12-year-old boy who avenges his sister's death at the jaws of a 1,000-pound feral hog, and how he tracks the hog through the swamp. And that story's been reprinted numerous times. And there's shades of it in Florida Man, too, because it's kind of a Florida Man story. And if I hear a name, that'll inspire me, too. And if you're looking for great names, you could do worse than watch Judge Judy.
Oh, my God.
The other day, I was looking through record notes, and the guy was thanking everybody who helped him make the record. He says, and thanks to Evil Finkelstein.
Oh, God.
I wrote that down.
Oh, Mike, you know, the craziest name, okay, I guess pun intended, was a therapist. I had to, take my kids to one, divorce and all that stuff, all that rot. And so the doctor's name was spelled Quazi. So I said quasi, thinking, it can't be quasi.
It was
Well,
crazy.
it sure as hell was quasi.
Oh, holy shit. How did you keep a straight face?
I didn't.
How did you do it?
I didn't. I was like,
Oh.
I can't. I'm sorry.
I'd have been
I hung up
committed.
the phone.
I'd have
Have
been
you used
committed.
that? Have you used that?
I have not. You are more than welcome. Real name, Dr. Quasi. The psychotherapist. True
Nope.
story.
Nope.
No. So I love that you are inspired by that and you write. One of the hardest things for most artists or writers to do, all right? I have this book here. It was given to me, this journal. It was given to me as a gift and a clue to get busy. And one of the scariest things,
A clue. It was a command.
it was a command. One of the scariest things is an empty page. So it sounds like you don't have to worry about ideas flowing and writing down things and stuff.
No, I
But
don't.
have you ever gotten to a point where you're like, I just don't know what direction this is going in, or I just don't know which project I want to work on next? I mean, you said you've got 3 novels in the works, and that just boggles my mind because I'm always telling the other voices, you be quiet. It's your turn right now.
It seems to me I'm a slacker because I have a friend named Peter Brandvold, who's the most successful Western writer in the country right now. And Pete, he sits down every morning. He writes 2,000 words before lunch every day, 7 days a week. He publishes at least 6 novels a year. He's very successful. And Kevin narrates his novels into a tape recorder while hiking through the mountains. And his novels are 150 to 250,000 words.
Wow.
And then he goes over them religiously. And that, that encourages me because I'm a bit lazy, but, I know I have to go over that story over and over again. Like this one I'm doing with Diggs, the military science fiction novel. Where I know it has to be at least 100,000 words. That's not going to be a problem the way Diggs is going. But what's a problem is formatting between his computer and my computer, sending it back and forth and having it show up funky or losing portions. But we'll get it all sorted out, and I know we will because we're going to be going over that manuscript 5 or 6 times.
So there are some people who are like, oh, 50,000 words is a lot. You're talking about 100,000 or more. Does it ever feel too big?
Well, I've only written 100,000 word novel thus far. It's Banshees, about a satanic rock band that comes back from the dead. But most of my novels are around 80,000 words. That's what I shoot for. Because I'm writing hard-boiled crime, and that's a good size for hard-boiled crime. You don't want an 800 hard-boiled crime novel. And I've written a couple of westerns under A.W. Hart's pseudonym. Wolfpack hired me to write those, and those are in the 60 to 70,000 word range. But I'm always shooting for at least 80,000 words.
That's a pretty hefty novel. When it comes to your writing process for novels specifically, are you a pantser? Are you a planner? A little bit of both?
I always outline, and I didn't used to, but I'm a firm believer in outlines. There are only a handful of novelists who don't outline. Elmore Leonard was one of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And how explicit is your outline? I mean, do you kind of lay it out with dialogue, with scenery and things like that, or is it just real short bullet points to get you from point A to B?
It's more bullet points, but they can range anywhere from 3 to 10 pages. But that's nothing. I understand Ken Follett's outlines run to 100 pages. But, I think that he leaves nothing to chance there. And to me, the story has to have an element of spontaneity. Because as you know, when you create a compelling character, at some point the character turns around and tells you what he's going to do next.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to leave room. I think a writer has to surprise himself before he can surprise the reader. And to me, the perfect ending always comes as both a complete surprise and, in retrospect, inevitable.
I love that, because there are oftentimes, when people write, you're like, I didn't expect it to go in that direction. Like, wait a minute, you're the writer. It's like, well, they had a mind of their own and I just had to listen.
Well, it all has to be part of a whole. It all has to make sense.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't beg the reader's credulity. They have to be able to believe it could happen, because the entertainment that attracts me, the stories I love the most, books, movies, or comics, are stories that I believe could happen.
Mm-hmm. So with writing, most people come out of the gate, they have a great beginning. Like you said, you have a great title and you kind of sit with it and you chew with it and it starts to come to life. So a title, a beginning. Most people have like that perfect ending that they want, but that middle is always the toughest part. Is it for you? And if so, how do you kind of get over that?
Well, yes and no. In the case of my crime novels, I'm talking about the biker series.
Mm-hmm.
And my protagonist is a reformed motorcycle hoodlum named Josh Pratt, who went to prison and found God in prison and comes out determined to be a good person. And he serves as a court of last resort for people who cannot get satisfaction through the law or any other means. And he was inspired by Travis McGee and John D. MacDonald, as so many writers are. But I'm happy that I've created a unique series and a unique milieu. And I'm working on the 9th novel now. And while some of them have to do with biker gangs, most do not. And Josh is a real straight shooter. He's not, doesn't crack wise. I never liked that in a protagonist. Like Robert Parker Spencer was always cracking wise with everybody. You know, I love those books too, but not for me. And it's just probably because of what I've been through in my life. But I like the strong, silent type who's always respectful. But you know, you push him too far, and he'll do what has to be done.
Clint Eastwood comes to mind.
Yeah.
With the Thin Blue Line, reading through your IndieGoGo campaign and everything, I mean, it seems like there's a lot of stuff that's coming right out of the news, which has not been easy these last couple of years.
Everything in that comic not only could happen, but most of it did happen.
Mm-hmm. So would you say that it was kind of inspired by these events? And
absolutely.
what was your motivation to write something? Because, you know, again, probably not easy, probably getting a lot of pushback from people. You know, and for me, I've got, you know, I've got family that's in the military. I've got so many friends and family in law enforcement, and they are good people essentially. But the mainstream loves to latch on to the bad.
Well, that's
news.
why I wrote it, because we all sat slack-jawed in amazement during the summer of rioting and looting as these idiots with microphones stood in front of a city in flames with looters running in and out of buildings saying, these are mostly peaceful protests. And then the howls to defund
Sure
the
look
police
peaceful.
began.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And my first response is, defund the police? Are you insane? Civilization depends on the rule of law.
Mm-hmm.
You're either for the rule of law or you're not. Now, I'm not saying we want to live in a police state. We don't. And we all know that the current atmosphere, we are approaching a police state in many respects. Unfortunately, they're coming down on the wrong people, anybody who rebels. And I also know a number of police officers, and they're overwhelmingly good people who joined in order to make a difference, to help their communities. Sure, there are bad cops. We all know there are bad cops, but they're a minority. In fact, they're a tiny minority. And to pretend that otherwise is just to lie or to give in to this ideological stupidity, which is a luxury for people who have grown up pampered and have their every need met and have never had to struggle for existence. It's one of my complaints is these people who get elected to public office have never created anything with their hands. They've never met a payroll. They never worry about where their next paycheck is coming from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it lies with us, you know, the blue collar workers, the white collar workers, even, you know, anybody who just wants to go out and make a difference, earn a living, an honest one, you know, and it's really tough. So, I mean, it's one of those things where, you know, when I saw this, I was like, oh my God, this is such a good story because it could be any neighborhood.
Yeah, and it's pure entertainment too. I mean, there's some sharp observations in there, and I think most people will agree with them. But there are no speeches, there are no condescending lectures. You get involved with these people. They're real people, and the situations are dramatic. It's just the pure stuff of drama. And that's why we have been inundated for the past half century with police, detective, lawyer, and medical shows, because they all deal with life and death. And that's the stuff of drama. And that's what people want in their entertainment.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Conflict resolution and things like that. Have you gotten any pushback from people who are just like, hey, Mike, I just want to be entertained. You know, this is just hitting too close to home.
No, not at all. And that's because this book is wildly entertaining. In fact, I would say with some confidence, it's more entertaining than any book published by the big two during the past 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
But I have nothing to do with that world of comics anymore. I was pushed out I've been blacklisted, as have a number of my friends, and we're all loosely associated with the movement called Comicsgate, which stands really for the inherent quality of the work, which is, I don't know how you would call it, but when you're hiring someone, ideally, you're going to hire the person that's most suited for the job. And you won't look at their sexual orientation, their ethnicity, or their religion, or anything like that. You want the person who can do the job the best.
Yeah.
And that's why I don't buy signal virtuing foods. Like, I keep going to the grocery store and I see this candy bar that says, "This candy bar saves lives."
From my belly.
I don't buy it.
It's one of those things. Okay, so Comicsgate, then, just can we talk about that for a second? Because I think
Sure.
there are a lot of people who have a misconception. You see it all over the internet. It's a hate group, and I can't be associated with you.
Hates women, hates minorities. Blah, blah,
And I
yeah.
know I have some friends who have planted the flag. I mean, we're media, so we're kind of neutral, and we'll talk to anybody. We've said that time and again. You know, as long as you're not an asshole, we'll talk to you. But there have been people like you. You know, you said you've been blacklisted. People who have lost team members because they're like, nope, don't want anything to do with it. What exactly is it from your perspective?
It's just a movement to create independent comics. And insofar as it stands for the quality of the book, I'm all for it. And that's what I think is true, that most Comicsgate books, the people just want to entertain, and they're following their own vision. And Comicsgate is a big tent, and it's got all sorts of people in it, from people who are just starting out and who produce comics of that may not be the top quality, but they're doing it on their own dime, and they don't have to answer to anyone, and they'll survive or fail on their own merits. To many established pros who are disgusted with what the majors have become and have just said, I can no longer work under that system. The rules are too crazy. The stories, the writers that they assign have no idea how to entertain. And a number of them are good friends of mine. Like, I've been friends with Gabe Eltai for well over 10 years. Gabe is from Greeley, Colorado, and we used to have these meetings at my house every month, including the penciler on Thin Blue Line, Joe Arnold, who was always drawing before he became a cop. Then Gabe became one of the top colorists in the world, working for DC. Somebody's home. And Gabe famously quit DC on Ethan Van Sciver's show a couple of weeks ago, saying, I can no longer go along with this. Did you hear about that? It was in all. It made Fox News. It made a number of national news stories.
And the dogs are still barking. Nita, can you drop the auction? We're going to take a little bit of a break while I go strangle my dogs.
All right.
Hey guys, this is Meredith Loughran at RAGIN AVC. We're organizing an art and swag bag auction to help one of our fellow indie creators and his family after a near-death experience with COVID-19. After months in the ICU under a drug-induced coma, our good friend Luke Stone is in a rehabilitation facility. He and his family need your help with continued thoughts and prayers, but also to help make ends meet. My personal connection with Luke is through friendship, but he's also the person who gave me my very first comic book writing credit in Hybrids, the Sons of God's trade paperback, Trash Day. This special live stream event is scheduled for November 13th and 14th, and we'll be updating our website with a catalog of items up for auction. If you wish to donate art, books, or a goodie bag, contact Nita Lanning or me at raginavc@gmail.com. Please share this out with your friends and help spread the word. As a community, we might not be able to help everyone, but we can try, one person at a time.
Hey, thanks for sticking around. My name's Luke Stone. I'm the writer and artist behind Hybrids. First, I want to give a heartfelt thank you to everyone who has supported this project over the years and who has been along the journey with me. You see, the very first time that I really ever wrote a script was Hybrids 1. And the first time I really did any kind of digital art was with Hybrids 1 and some of the concept art for that. But hopefully you will enjoy the journey of this story as I grew not only as a writer and an artist, but also as an individual in my in my own life in all aspects, because it definitely was a journey, and some of those things found their way into the pages of this story. I've tried to put a little piece of myself in all of it, and I've tried to put a little piece of all the people that I've been able to meet along my own personal journey in it as well, so that there's something there for everybody to connect with. Thank you again for making it to the end of this video, and I look forward to not only just being able to give you this story, but also to meet you one day, hopefully in person, or at least through some kind of contact where we can share kind of our love for comics and our love for the medium. So have a great day, and God bless you.
And we're back. We are raging with Mike Barron, episode 65. Make sure that you head over to the YouTube channel. We are simulcasting to Geek Insider as well as Ragin EVC. We're on Twitter as well. If you want to leave comments, make sure you go over to YouTube, because we can't see your comments otherwise. Get over here and hit the subscribe button. We're dropping the card. My dogs have survived. My husband is home, and and we're
Don't
back.
believe it unless I see them.
Proof of life, Nita.
Proof of life, Meredith.
I know Mike's got dogs.
I got dogs that they're sleeping, fortunately.
Yes. This hour for interviews is tough, because like right at the half an hour mark, I'm just like, okay, we got to get that bumpy before the dogs start barking.
I told you I'm on that. I'm moving it. It's going to change at the end of this month.
There you go. So before we took the break, you were talking about basically working by merit, doing good work. Independent comics, from what I've seen, I think for a long time it probably had a bad rap, almost like people who were publishing their own things. Oh, it's a vanity press. Oh, you're doing this independently because nobody else will publish you. You're just not that good. But I'm seeing a lot of independent comics that are high quality art, storytelling. It's amazing. And it feels like the beginning, perhaps, of a golden age of indie comics.
Well, I hope so. This is
let's get you on the big screen here.
This is a version of Nexus. It was illustrated by Kelsey Shannon. Even though I created it with Steve Rude, we're doing projects independent of each other.
Yes.
Nice.
And Richard Meyer published this, and he has a video show called Ya Boy Zach. You may have heard of any comments on comics all the time. And I have a number of projects in the works with Dark Horse, more Nexus comics. And I've been turning out independent comics for years, and I'm very proud of them. This one is The Architect. This is a horror story inspired by the life of Frank Lloyd Wright. And if you like the cover, the illustrations inside are absolutely brilliant. They're by Andy Tong.
And that's what I mean. It's like the quality of art, the quality of storytelling. You can find some really good gems in the indies. I mean, don't get me wrong, you can find a whole lot of garbage too. But
you can find garbage mainstream coming out of some of the big, some of the biggers.
The big two. You know Sturgeon's Law. Do you know who Theodore Sturgeon was? He's a great science fiction writer. Sturgeon's Law says 90% of everything is crap.
Oh, man. I hope that's not true.
I think it's probably true when it comes to the arts.
So how do you rise above the crap? How do you, when you feel like you've got a good story, okay, you're a writer, and I'm sure when you're writing, you're feeling everything. That whole show me, don't tell me, don't bonk me on the head with this stuff. Show me, let me be in this world. how do you rise above to say, hey, like there's this level of quality that's there. See me.
Well, I think everybody has to create their own style. There are thousands of books on writing, but there's only one essential book. It's called Elements of Style by Strunk and White. And other than that, you just have to write. And writers are people who have to write. They write every day. And you keep at it until you get to a place where you say, yeah, that's my voice. It's coming out the way I want. And one of the bright spots in my life is I think I'm getting better as a writer every time I sit down. And we've all had doubts about our work in the past. Is it any good? But recently, I don't have doubts because I know my stuff is good. I know that it's fresh, that I'm using fresh dialogue, that I'm showing, not telling, that I'm entertaining the reader. I won't let a story go if any part of it is boring or flat. You can't lose the reader during those parts. Every part of the story must be entertaining, just as every part of the comic must advance the story. And we've all seen comics where obviously the writer's just marking time and doesn't know what to do. So you have somebody making a speech, and a lot of speeches in comics, which probably come from the writer's true beliefs or soul about something he's ticked off about. But that's not why people read comics. They read comics to be entertained. And that's the number one rule. The number one rule is you've got to entertain.
And there are a lot of people who have this misconception. Maybe they haven't picked up a comic book since they were a kid. And so they have this perception that comics are for kids. And it's just pictures and words and grow up. Grow up.
Well, that's never been the case in Europe. And it's no longer the case in the United States. If you've seen Art Spiegelman's Mouse, which won a Pulitzer Prize, it's a very serious look at the Holocaust. And for people who don't know what that is, that book is in every bookstore in the land, believe me. And it's a retelling of the Holocaust about his parents, in fact, their journey, except he casts all the Jews as mice and the Nazis as cats. And that's how he can deal with it. But it's still a pretty bleak book. Now, I remember the underground comics that grew up in the 60s and the 70s, by the work of R. Crumb or Gilbert Shelton, who did the Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers. That's a TV show now. Those comics were not only brilliantly drawn, they were brilliantly written. Not all of them. I mean, R. Crumb has produced so much stuff that not all of it is great. But the good stuff is great, and you have to admire him because he had absolutely no filter on himself, no self-censorship at all. And that shocked a lot of people, but it was also revelatory in a way. And as for Gilbert Shelton, well, he was just a master storyteller. He still is, with a tremendous sense of humor. He knows how to set up a gag. So there have been adult comics in this country for a long time, and many of those underground comics very high level of professionalism in the art and the storytelling.
And we're getting ready to bring up your crowdfund here, Thin Blue Line, the graphic novel by Mike Barron. Now, when you were saying that you write novels and they're like 80,000, 100,000 words and things like that, a lot of times that's forgivable and even expected when it comes to a novel. When it comes to comic books, though, graphic novels and things, a lot of times people fall into this trap. I've seen it time and time again with the storytelling, where they feel so confined within X amount of pages that it almost feels like they've rushed the ending. That drives me crazy.
Well, a page is endlessly elastic. It can contain a single image, or you can divide it up into 9 or 10 images. And a comic has a pulse and a rhythm all by itself. And when I write a comic, I keep that in mind so that it expands. The image expands when it has to, and it contracts when it has to. That means an image will have only 2 panels on a page. And then you go to a page where people are talking, maybe you'll have 6 panels. I very rarely go beyond 6 panels, and I very rarely waste a single page on one image. Because if you reveal the monster, it's a great drawing of a monster, but it doesn't advance the story. And for the story to advance, I think the page has to have at least 2 panels. The only time I use a full page splash is when I reveal something like an ancient civilization or something that should inspire awe, and the artist can pull it off. And by saying that the page is infinitely elastic, you can tell a lot of story in 24 pages. In fact, I think that most modern comics don't tell enough story. And that doesn't mean they don't have enough words. They certainly have enough words. Some of them have more than enough words. It's just that they'll waste a lot of space on comic book cliches, like the reveal of the monster, or when the hero approaches in this moment of awe, and they get so carried away with drawing the abs and the lats and all those little muscles that superhero comics love. But the reader looks at it and says, yeah, it's a good drawing, but it's really not advancing the story.
Right. So how do you, when you're doing kind of your doodle thumbnails and putting your script together and things like that, have you ever been like, oh, I missed a moment, let me add a page? Has that happened?
Well, that doesn't happen when I turn the script over to the artist. It happens before then. I go back and over a script many, many times. I'll change things. I'll add a page. I'll redo all the numbering to make sure that it's a seamless whole. And one of the things is like Chekhov said, if you show a gun in the first scene hanging on the wall, you have to use it by the third or fourth act. And so I'm always planting those things early in a story. And sometimes I don't know why I plant them. This goes for novels too. But as I near the end of the story, I find out that whatever it is I planted early becomes essential or crucial to the resolution of the story. It may be a character, it may be a gun on the wall.
And so tell us a little bit about the inspiration behind Officer Baca.
Well, I wanted a sympathetic protagonist. So I made her a single mother. The writer's job is to imagine every point of view. A writer cannot be restricted, according to others, to stay within his lines and only write about people exactly like him. Should Shakespeare have been allowed to write Othello? That's the question people are asking today, and it's a senseless question for obvious reasons. Should William Styron have been allowed to write The Confessions of Nat Turner? Well, it's a stupid question, especially in light of the book he produced and in light of Shakespeare's plays. It's the writer's job to imagine every point of view, and if a writer can't do that, he's not going to be a good writer. So anyhow, I made Valeria Baca, and she was inspired to be a cop by her great-great-grandfather, Elfego Baca, who was a real lawman in the Southwest. In fact, Disney had a show about him for many years. I used to watch it. And I did that to make her sympathetic, but I also make her sympathetic because she is sympathetic, because I show her at home with her child, and we don't just see her with the uniform on. We see all sides of her life. And other than that, the story really wrote itself because these riots take a familiar path. They start off as a peaceful demonstration, and then somebody throws the first Molotov cocktail and it's on. And you have people out there who think they have legitimate issues, although I don't think that excuses them from destroying other people's property or lives. You know, those riots last year did over $2 billion of damage, and dozens of people were murdered, and thousands of small businesses, people who could least afford it, were wiped out and destroyed. And that's one of the reasons I wrote the story, and that's all in the book.
Yeah, speaking to that, it was never in their own backyard.
No.
It always seemed to be in somebody else's.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
So we're kind of scrolling through the images here. Amazing artwork. And I did want to scroll up here because, let me see, and give a tip of the hat to Joe Arnold a man in uniform. Thank you for your service. Just putting that out there. And yeah, pencils and layouts. That's really kind of cool that you were able to find somebody who probably felt the story as powerfully as you did.
Yeah, well, as I say, I've known Joe for many years before he became a policeman.
Mm-hmm. And when it comes to finding your creative team, this is something that we have touched on with a lot of other creators who've sat in that seat. And there's a certain amount of nepotism, because a lot of times what we do is we kiss a lot of frogs before we find the prince or the princess.
And God, there are some frogs out there.
And so when you find that prince or princess, you want to keep them, and you work with them from one project to the other, and you hope that they're not too busy to work on your next one. What has that been like for you?
Well, I've had the privilege of working with some of the greatest artists in the world, and I'm working with some of them now. I'm working with Pat Broderick, and I'll send you his art tomorrow so you can see what he's doing. But I've always wanted to work with him, and this is the best work of his career. And of course, Steve Root and I have been working together for 40 years. Although 10 years ago he started rejecting my scripts and rewriting them all, and that's why he's doing his own Nexus and I'm doing mine. Mm-hmm. And Bill Reinhold, another great illustrator, Rags Morales, Jill Thompson, too many illustrators to mention.
Yeah. So when you said he started rewriting, did that hurt your ego at all?
Oh, of course it did. But the proof is in the pudding, and I invite you to look at the reviews of his magnum opus on Amazon. Mm-hmm.
It's kind of funny too, because with every good story is usually a pretty good editor who's like, cut it, you don't need it.
Well, I have had hardly any editorial interference at all.
Oh, aren't you the lucky one?
I mean, I can't remember anybody changing a Punisher script or a Flash script or Nexus or Badger while I was writing those.
But he doesn't monologue when he writes, Meredith.
Oh.
You were monologuing and being redundant. My defense.
That wasn't nice, Nita.
No, it wasn't.
My feelings are hurt.
But you cut it, and it's great.
So hurtful.
That's okay. That's how we get thick skin. That's how we get the rejection letters. Don't tell me you never got a rejection letter, Mike.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I wish I saved them like all my other pals. I just never saved them.
I saved my very first one. I lost it somewhere in a move because it was proof positive that even though I had a negative response, it was that I had finished something to send out to somebody.
Yeah.
And they said no. And that's okay.
Sure.
So we've got Thin Blue Line here, everybody. We have been talking with Mike Barron. Hey, Mike, is it okay if I play the video?
Please.
Okay, so let's get that up on the big screen here. And stay tuned, you guys. We're watching the trailer for Thin Blue Line. It is on IndieGoGo right now. 17 days left. Do you plan on extending that or going into
yes,
demand?
we're going to go into on demand because we've already met our goal.
Nice.
But we're aiming much higher than that. I look at some of these Comicscape projects, and I understand how they're doing well because they have brilliant award-winning artists putting them out, but they're also very genre-friendly, superhero, horror, dames. That's what people like, and this is neither fish nor fowl. Although to mainstream entertainment consumers, it's certainly right in the mainstream.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll be right back after we play the video, and we'll continue talking with Mike Barron. Here we go.
Beginning with issue number 1, Mike Barron wrote Marvel's The Punisher for over 5 years, approaching it as a straight crime comic, without any superheroes, aliens, or robots. Over the course of 60 issues, Barron elevated the gritty anti-hero into one of the most popular and enduring characters in the Marvel Comics universe. Now he brings that same ultra-realistic intensity to his latest graphic novel, Thin Blue Line. In the middle of a long, hot summer, a police shooting ignites a city. Activists, opportunists, and provocateurs descend to riot, loot, burn, and kill. Thin Blue Line follows Officer Valeria Baca and her partner as their detail guarding the mayor turns into a battle for survival. Ride along on this harrowing tale of two brave law enforcement officers fighting for their community and their own survival in a world gone mad. Eisner winner Mike Barron has created an alarming tale that unflinchingly examines human fallibility on every level. Along with penciler Joe Arnold, himself a full-time police officer, and talented anchor Jeff Slemons, they've created a moving and entertaining story ripped straight from today's headlines. Thin Blue Line exposes the defund the police movement and its consequences for society, but several comic book companies have refused to publish it. Now we're asking you to join the effort to distribute it independently and help support the men and women of law enforcement. Get your copy of the only graphic novel to offer an unflinching and not always flattering look at the men and women of law enforcement during a time when we need them the most. Not all heroes wear capes. It's a thin blue line between the rule of law and a world of chaos. Which side are you on? Thin Blue Line by Mike Barron. Order now on IndieGoGo.
That is a great trailer.
I want to thank Sam Elliott for providing the narration.
I was going to say, I recognize the voice. Thin Blue Line, everybody, on IndieGoGo. We've got 17 days left for the active campaign before it goes in demand. Make sure that you share this out. Hashtag back the blue. And really, it looks like very compelling storytelling. Really excited to see this book come to life. But just because you've got an active campaign right now doesn't mean that you've stopped writing. You've said that you've got a few novels in the works. What have you got in the comic realm?
Oh, I can't wait for people to see the next Florida Man graphic novel. It's even funnier than the first. In fact, I think it's the funniest comic ever written. But that's just my opinion. I'm a proud papa, you know. But Florida Man is as far from Thin Blue Line as you can get, because the whole point of Florida Man is to make you burst out laughing, and you do that by piling absurdity on absurdity.
It does have a lot of ridiculousness, and 1980 is calling. They want their mullet back. It was a lot of fun. But where can they find your other books? Are they all on Amazon? Do you have a website?
Well, I have a website. It's bloodyredbaron.com. But if you just go to Amazon and type in Mike Barron, all my books will come up. There's page after page going back many years, including a lot of comic compilations. But all my novels are there. That's what's most important. And I'm proudest of my 3 horror novels and the biker novels. And 3 horror novels are Banshees, about a satanic rock band that comes back from the dead; Scorpio, about a ghost who only appears under a blazing sun; and Domain, which is the ultimate haunted house story. And then there are 8 biker novels, and there are 3 Florida Man novels.
Mm-hmm. And if there was a genre that you haven't written in but thought maybe I'll try my hand at it, what would that be?
Meredith, I don't know. I don't know, because I never expected to write Florida Man. It never occurred to me until every time I went online, there was another Florida Man story. And I always say I don't choose my stories choose me. But I hope to be writing many more biker novels. And I know I'm going to be writing another Florida Man novel. I already have an idea. He invents a car called the Boll Weevil, which runs on cotton. Because, if it breaks down the middle of nowhere, you always have your underwear.
And wow. Hold on a second. Let me catch my breath there. So I have no idea what I was going to say after that. Nita's losing it too. we are looking forward to Thin Blue Line. These other books are available. In fact, we do have your links on the show description. So we have the website. We also have a link to your Amazon author page, and a lot of stuff that you can get. A lot of history with your storytelling. Do you ever get lost in the research, or because from the personal, the way that you kind of get into these stories, it sounds like you talk to a lot of people to kind of get that background information.
I do whatever I have to make it real. And as you know, the internet is one of the greatest gifts to writers ever, because you can just type in what causes restless leg syndrome, or how many cheetahs are there in South America, whatever.
Wow, your search history is so pure. I probably have handlers.
We're probably like, yeah, I'm just doing research for my next book, Carl. Whatever your handler's name is. I probably would be a little bit offended if I wasn't on some kind of soft watch list, when it came to my research and things like that. Do you ever get lost in your research?
Not really.
It's never taken you down a rabbit hole and you're like, oh my God, that's not the story I started with. What the hell?
Oh no, I'll find a way to use it, because I know where I want the story to go. But I'll let the research sway me. I'll let it take me down a path I hadn't considered if we end up at the same destination.
Mm-hmm. That takes discipline. That takes a lot of discipline, and so does writing every single day. And on that note, we do have one more question that we ask our guests. We are just past our hour. Nita, don't yell at me. But Mike, if you were going to give advice to anybody new coming into the industry, whether they're a writer, an artist, just kind of looking for their way in, what piece of advice would you give them?
Well, if you want to write, as I said, writers are people who have to write. And that takes discipline. It doesn't mean you have to do 2,000 or 3,000 words a day, but it does mean you always carry that notepad and pen with you, and you write down anything that strikes your fancy. And when you get an idea, you write it down. That way you won't forget it. Because writing things down or saying them aloud kind of seals them in your memory. And I filled up so many of these loose leaf binders, I can't tell you. They're going back like 30 years. And I go through about 3 of them a year.
Wow. Well, on that note, you guys, it has been a pleasure to be raging with Mike Barron. Back the Blue. Get over to IndieGoGo and take a look at Thin Blue Line. If you've backed it already, thank you. If you haven't, take a look at it. Give it a share. And tune in to the replay, because this has been an excellent conversation about the Genesis story, where you've come from, Mike, what you're doing, and we appreciate you for being here. This has been episode 65. Mike, don't go anywhere. We can chat after we end this. But you know what? I need to drop the card. You know why? Mike,
Why?
Can you do us a favor?
Oh.
Do us a favor. Say, throw my dudes. We've confused him.
Who, me?
Yeah, say, throw my dudes.
Throw my dudes?
That's it. We're out of here, you guys. Have a great evening.
Hey there, this is Meredith Loughran with RAGIN, and I wanted to let you know that we encourage and promote independent creators and their projects through organic interaction, consultations, and more. Visit Nita and me at RAGINAVC.com for details and contact information. Hit the button.